to give us an operational update of the power utility. There's lots of confusion. We'll get into that in a moment, Andrew. Wasn't that an interesting interview with David Constable there? And the way that shale gas is transforming the whole function, the whole energy function in the United States. In our context, Eskom must be paying a lot of attention to this.
Oh, it's a game changer for sure. And if we're trading off, for example, shale gas versus a massive nuclear program, these are the implications for South Africa. Trillions of rands worth of electricity infrastructure needs to be developed over the next few years. And if shale gas is going to be everything it promises to be, that diverts hundreds of billions of that trillions towards an entirely different technology for South Africa. So very, very exciting. Of course, we're keeping a very close eye on it. A lot has to do with price. Obviously, this isn't just free energy out of the ground. So we will need to see how our shale gas competes with other resources in the region as well. It's not just in South Africa, Mozambique, even Zimbabwe. Now Botswana, all good prospects, and we're keeping a very close eye to get the very best deal for South Africa.
It's very exciting. Sure. And it's a transformational, as you say. It's been a game changer in the United States, and we haven't quite understood in South Africa what the implications are. But who knows, maybe you'll be dropping electricity prices in future.
Let's hope. That would be great.
Andrew, what is going on? Business Day this morning saying Chief Executive and Chairman of Eskom at odds over what's going on. You're the man we rely on. What is the situation?
It seems to be a confusion around the use of the word crisis. And of course, different people under the conditions we've had over the past couple of days some would describe it as a crisis and not a crisis. And I think it comes down to nitpicking about a particular issue. I think there's good alignment between the chairman and the chief executive. I think our chairman used the word crisis and the chief executive said it wasn't a crisis. But ultimately, I think the fundamental reality is, I think, is understood by all. We have a very serious situation, whether you call that a crisis, being something out of control or not. I personally haven't used the word crisis. We're now been communicating because we have it under control. And
but we did have load shedding for the first time since 2008, and I guess some people would say that's a crisis.
Yes, of course, and I think that's certainly for business, that would be a crisis from the perspective of business. If you don't have electricity and you're needing this electricity to function, that in your environment would be a crisis. But I wouldn't say Eskom's in a crisis, and I think that the fact that we are doing load shedding proactively to protect against a system blackout, I think we spoke about it on a previous occasion, I think is once again the proactive measure is an indication that we have the situation under control. It's not pleasant, of course, to our customers who feel the brunt of the actions we are taking to protect the grid, but the grid is fundamentally stable, it's in good shape, and we'll make sure that, that it stays
so the grid's good. I got an SMS over the week, and we spoke about this before on your database,
yes,
which said, thank you for helping us, thank you for switching off your pool pump and your geyser or whatever
yes,
it was. We no longer need to continue with load shedding.
Right.
Was that an accurate SMS? Or can I relax now?
Yes, so what we're doing is monitoring the situation on a daily basis. So you would have received that SMS, I presume, on Friday, and it goes out to everyone, whether you have a pool pump or not. So I take your point that there would be certain inaccuracies relating to your particular appliances. But as from Friday, we haven't load shed. The grid is still very tight, and we can't rule out the possibility of going back, unfortunately, if we did see technical problems arise again. So the SMS was really talking about, on that particular moment, load shedding had been suspended, and let's work to continue it that way.
So in the immediate future, how long is that then? If you tell me on Friday no more load shedding, does that mean that tomorrow you might send an SMS to say, oh, sorry, we've got issues again?
We can't rule that out. I think what we're saying is...
So what's the risk of it happening?
Right. We are at the moment monitoring the situation on an ongoing basis. We can't actually give you a definitive answer, yes or no. I guess it comes down to probabilities, and I'm a statistician, but even I wouldn't attach a number to it. But I would, if I was pushed, I would probably say 10% chance of load shedding, 90% chance that everything will recover. Certainly since Thursday, we've seen significant improvement in the performance of our generators in responding to the wet coal. We've had better, drier coal coming through from our suppliers over the last few days.
Andrew,
so
what's the story with wet coal?
Sure.
Come on, every time it rains, or rains for an extended period, and we as the members of the public don't actually buy that story.
No, fair enough, and that's understandable. Since 2008, we've done a lot of work to make ourselves resilient against wet coal. In fact, since 2008, you wouldn't have heard about us talking about wet coal. So the plans we put in place have worked. This time, the weather has been extreme. It's been well outside the bounds and the assumptions that we've made together with meteorologists and the weather department about what we can expect. We do a lot of risk analysis in Eskom on a continuous basis through a very formal process, looking at thousands of risks to various points on our supply chain. So this has been well outside those bounds. So the dry coal stockpiles which we had developed and built up at our power stations in response to the best information we had, unfortunately weren't enough, and that's what's happened. So in the next round of planning, of course, we'd have to change those assumptions, change the level of dry coal stockpiles. There's a cost associated, unfortunately, so we will improve our resilience as we go.
What happens in countries where it rains all the time? You think poor people in England, how do they manage to get the wet coal to work for them? And for us, we have a couple of weeks of rain and we're in trouble.
Well, certainly good. Interesting that you mentioned England, who have themselves had power interruptions relating to the weather. Let me just start there. If there is, and it comes back to an understanding of the risks and the risk profile, if you're in a country such as England or Germany where there is a substantial chance of ongoing rain, of course you will build protection mechanisms, even to the extent of putting coal under cover permanently, but there's a cost. So at what point do we make that investment, knowing that investment costs money, it's expensive, and we need to ultimately pass those costs through to you as a customer. So what we do is we take a risk-based approach to all the risks to our infrastructure, which can be anything to a power line. We can't, for example, afford to put in 100 different power lines to your home, but to secure your supply, we would actually need to do that. So these are, at every point, there are certain risks, and we have to do our very best to manage those risks in a cost-effective manner.
So the whole rational approach that you've taken to us is great. The emotional approach that most members of the public have is, but hang on, we've been paying substantial increases in the last few years. Eskom still can't get it right.
Sure. The increases have been significant over the last couple of years, but our price of electricity is still amongst the lowest in the world. And on the residential side, yes, there are countries, particularly those in Africa, where electricity is either free or it's heavily subsidized, so we don't actually look at residential, but on business, that certainly is the case. So yes, we would all want lower electricity costs, and perhaps technologies, as we were talking about, gas and the opportunity from fracking, etc., could improve the situation, and of course we're looking at that. We want to provide the world's lowest cost electricity again, as we did before.
What about more privatization? What about letting the private sector get more involved? We heard a moment ago David Constable talking about Sasol in the US doing some cogeneration into the power grid. Can they not do more of that here? Can you not encourage people more?
Yes, we do. In fact, Sasol, as an example, are an independent power producer that participates on our grid, as an example. We have more than 30 contracts with independent power producers, some of which are actively producing, others are in the final stages of construction to feed into the grid. So the independent power producers and the private sector is going to be also a very big game changer in the grid already. But I think the important point is to make is that it will not necessarily translate into a lower electricity price. Those private investors will want a return which is probably going to be bigger than the government of South Africa as Eskom's shareholder wants. So
I don't think that's an issue. Yeah. It's more security of supply. If you take a say by the end of next year, yes, with the independent power producers coming in, what percentage would they be producing of the power that South Africa consumes?
That would be, just in terms of the independent power producers active in South Africa, you'd be looking at about 1,600 megawatts by that stage, and that would translate into about 5% of the South African capacity, which will increase very rapidly from that stage, from 5%. Ultimately, the government have said that 30% would be their minimum level at which they would feel comfortable that IPPs are playing a meaningful role. But again, very important, if you're looking at security of supply, this is not going to be the be-all and end-all. Remembering that 20 years ago, when we wanted an electricity market competitor to come in, nobody came in. Nobody wanted to come in and make the investment to take Eskom on through a competitive process, which is why we led to the situation we have. We stopped Eskom making the investments 15, 20 years ago, which is why we are now. We have to be very, very careful about the way we design a market, the way we encourage IPP investment.